Okay, now we're going to talk about heuristic evaluation. Heuristic evaluation is, as the name suggests, it's using a set of heuristics for an evaluation. Uh, okay, so we're going to talk about who, what, when, where, how, what the principles are, that sort of thing. What is a heuristic evaluation? Well, first, what is a heuristic? A heuristic is the kind of the opposite, not really the opposite, but a heuristic is best compared to an algorithm. If you think of an algorithm as a tried and true methodology that will work every single time, a heuristic is more of a rule of thumb. It's a guideline, something to measure something by. It's not it's not a mathematical formula that will work every single time, but it's a guideline. It's something that 80-20 rule. A heuristic evaluation is a form of usability inspection where you employ a set of well-defined guidelines that ensure you avoid classic design mistakes. Um, these guidelines determine whether your interface follows established usability guidelines or what we call heuristics. These are the same types of heuristics that served as design rules when you're designing an interface from scratch. We've already talked about some of these already. The principles behind heuristics come from a variety of disciplines. They come from cognitive psychology. They come from topography. They come from human-computer interface studies. They come from cultural studies. Similar heuristics have been derived by multiple people through distillation of problems with usability through usability testing. Really, the first big seminal paper that came out and proposed this methodology as a valid methodology, as a true tried and true, put a stake in the ground methodology, came out at the Chi conference, I believe in the early, back in 92, maybe early 90s in any case. Basically it was Nielsen and Malik basically saying, we went through hundreds of usability tests and we were able to um, basically distill common usability problems down to these 10 major types of errors that we saw over and over and over, and these form the basis of our heuristics. And those are 10 of the heuristics we still use today. Since then, several other people have proposed different lists of heuristics. Most of them are fairly similar in nature. The point, though, is that you're comparing an interface against a recognized set of guidelines. And the key is that recognized set of guidelines. You're not comparing it against your opinion, you're comparing it against industry standards. And this is important because while your opinion is important, your opinion, especially when you've been doing this as long as I have, I'd like to think that, if I'm going to tell somebody something's wrong with your interface, my opinion is an educated one. My opinion is based on 17 years in the business and 7 years of education before that as to why an interface should be one way or the other. But when I present my opinion, I have to present it as not my opinion. I have to present a good solid argument for it, and part of the heuristics are to help guide my thinking, and honestly, part of the heuristics are to help other people understand that I'm not just making this stuff up, that there's a reason for this. um, one of the things that one of the reasons to do heuristics is it's a lot cheaper than usability testing, as I pointed out in the earlier section about user observation, user testing. User testing is expensive. You're not going to be able to do user testing every opportunity. Every time you iterate on your design, you're not going to be doing user testing, but you can do a really quick heuristic evaluation over somebody's shoulder or at different design, at different iterations. So you can conduct them informally, you can conduct them formally. You can do them as a quick beginning point to see, where should you go next. The other thing is you should never do a you should never do a usability test without doing a heuristic evaluation first. Because your time with your users is so valuable, you shouldn't waste users' time finding things that you could have found in-house. That being said, the things found by heuristic evaluations and things found by users aren't necessarily 100% match. users are going to find things that um, are more interaction based at times. And they may find things that even the best trained heuristic evaluation person might not. By the other token, a heuristic evaluation may point out things that a user may or may not have noticed in a short amount of time. And actually, that's where some of the value of heuristic evaluations are, is because, especially given, if you've got a user with a pretty high level of expertise, they can often spot things that users aren't going to notice on first blush when they're doing just an hour-long usability test. But an expert may be able to see things that they have experience to know are the kind of things that start to annoy users once they use the application many times. So, it's not a perfect analog, and that's why I'm never going to tell you to do only heuristic evaluations, and I'm never going to tell you to do only usability testing. They truly are complementary activities. That being said, you know, you really should end up doing a lot more heuristic evaluations than you do usability testing. So who should do a heuristic evaluation? If you're going to do a classic heuristic evaluation, they're usually performed by trained professionals. When they're performed by HCI professionals, they also can be called expert reviews. One well-trained professional can find 40 to 50% of percent of problems. Four can try find 80 to 90%. That's kind of the number that they throw out there. They can also be performed by users. They're often called participatory heuristic evaluation. They're good when time is short, when the budget is not, to do this participatory heuristic evaluation. This is an activity I do with focus groups a lot. Focus groups as a true evaluative, like task-based exercise, not necessarily a good thing, but I have used a participatory heuristic evaluation with focus groups to get user feedback, where I've given them screenshots and I've let them get together in groups and let them pick it apart. Now, is it true task-based interface feedback? No, not really. But it is still valuable feedback about things that the users don't understand, maybe words that confuse them or places that we didn't catch that we switched buttons around and stuff like that. It's still valuable feedback, even if it's not true usability feedback. So, certainly things to think about. So how do you do a heuristic evaluation? I know this is something that folks are wondering. If you're doing it formally, you'll potentially develop a checklist. You'll determine if it's a task-based heuristic evaluation or an exploratory heuristic evaluation. The only difference between the two is if it's a task-based, you are actually going along a specific set of tasks and seeing what problems you find along those tasks. If it's exploratory, you're just basically going through the application and seeing what you find. You identify the problems, you write them down, you consolidate them, you prioritize them, and you come up with the recommendations. Screenshots are invaluable. I say consolidate them in parentheses because it depends on if you have more than one person. If it's informal, this is what I do 95% of the time when I'm working, like, actually inside a company as opposed to as a consultant. You're always on the lookout for things that are wrong. An engineer calls you over and says, "Hey, can you take a look at something?" You're doing a heuristic evaluation. You're taking a look. You're saying, "Hey, that's wrong because the OK and cancel buttons are flip-flopped from what they should be. Here's the recommendation that I tell you. Switch them so that OK is on the left and cancels on the right." You just did a heuristic evaluation. Done. Um, so that's how you do it. It really is that simple. The tools of the trade. It's really as simple as I use Excel, PowerPoint, and the application personally that I use to do screenshots is Snagit. And the reason I use Snagit is because it allows me to easily grab the screenshots as I go, and then without having to save each individual screenshot, it actually saves them in a library, and then I can go back, pull them out of the library, drop them into PowerPoint, and I can do a bunch of stuff that PowerPoint actually has a lot of cool tools in it now, able to blur and magnify and all that kind of stuff that it didn't used to. But before, you couldn't do all of that stuff in PowerPoint. And actually, I recently learned that PowerPoint actually has a really nice screenshot tool that it didn't used to have. So if you've got the latest version of PowerPoint, you don't even actually need Snagit. Instead, you can actually work from within PowerPoint. And there's a tool that I use two monitors, and so I'll have PowerPoint up on one screen, and I'll have Excel up, or I'll have the program I'm working on another screen. I'll have Excel up as well, and I'll um, grab a screenshot, drop it into PowerPoint. I'll type something up in Excel really quickly, and then I'll go from there. The reason I continue to put stuff in Excel is it allows me to do the slicing and dicing that I need on my data, and that PowerPoint simply can't. However, the presentation in PowerPoint is certainly far and away exceeds the presentation that you're going to get in Excel. And I'll show you what. Actually, I'll just go ahead and show you those right now. Just a moment. Let me pull them up. All right. So you'll see here is the evaluation sample. Um, so here is the. I'm going to pause this for just a. All right, so here's the Excel file that I was referring to. This is, you'll see, this is an Excel file that I provide to the client, but it's also a file I work in. You'll see, here's the heuristics. Normally the application name would be here, but I've cleared it out. Here's the item number that refers to the item number that's in the bottom right-hand corner of the PowerPoint slides. And the reason I do this is because when I'm sorting and slicing and dicing what order I end up putting the slides in, they sometimes will get out of order. And then if I change the text, I want to be able to refer back. Location in the UI, heuristic category, description of the problem, what's the recommendation, and then what the severity is. Right now, I'm not even sure how these are sorted. I think they may be sorted by issue order. But anyway, you can see these are color coded. The way this is actually set up, these color codings are done using conditional formatting. Um, these tables here are built out based on, I mean, it's counting the data. So, we're using formulas and stuff like that. But these tables are then pulled into the report that we provide in PDF format. Well, it's a PDF version of the PowerPoint. But this allows this, by providing this Excel file, that allows the the customer, whether it's an internal or an external customer, it allows them to slice and dice and review the data the way they want. But then the PDF is a nice, pretty presentation version, and the heuristic reference just gives them. Um, we provide this at the end of the PowerPoint as well. But once again, providing you know once again, this isn't our opinion. We're not making this up. Um, and then the this is the PDF, the heuristic evaluation sample that I have posted online. This is just telling you, this is actually an evaluation that I did literally in February. Um, and I haven't provided all of the slides that I did, but this is exactly the presentation document that I provided to the client. What is a heuristic evaluation? What were the objectives? What were the methods? We did two human factor specialists, and one of the things I pointed out in the executive review was that the two human factor specialists we picked in this case was, I was one of them, and I happen to be really, really deep in the healthcare domain, and I spent 10 years doing electronic health records, which this particular product was an EHR. So, on one hand, I had a really deep domain knowledge, so I was a good user analog for the clinical staff who would be using an EHR. On the other hand, the other human factors person we had really deep human factors knowledge, but didn't work very often in the healthcare space. He did more financial stuff, and so he was actually a very good user analog for the front desk staff, because they have very high turnover with very little clinical knowledge. And so we actually, we picked the people that we picked very deliberately, to provide good user analogs. So anyway, in this case, we talked about the overall action plan, the categories. You'll notice these are the categories from the Excel file, the severity ratings, and then our findings and recommendations, general impressions. And I left all of this information in here to kind of give you an idea of when you do your final presentation or when you move forward into your career, what are the kind of things that how you want to present your information. um, one of the biggest mistakes you can make is, um, a lot of people come to research, or come to UX from a research background, and so they make the mistake of providing their research first. and then they provide the results. Well, in industry, we care about the results. We don't care about the research. So provide your results and your recommendations, and then provide me your research. And so that's what I'm giving you, my general impressions. What do you need to do with this information? And then we'll give you more of the details. So short-term, long-term recommendations, and then I get into some of these results. And this is a very common format in the industry of like I said, I blurred it out so that because the person who I subcontracted for said yes, I could I was welcome to use this as an example, but I had to pull the firm that I contracted for off the PowerPoint, which I did, and also blur out the pictures of the product, which I did because my point of showing you this was less about showing you any design and more about showing you the process. So you'll see that here I've shown a screenshot. I've shown arrows pointing to that screenshot, and I've shown you both what the problem was. I've given you an idea of why it's a problem, and I've shown you recommendations. Now, sometimes when I'm doing this, you know, sometimes the recommendations are really easy. Sometimes the recommendations are going to be things like, I'm not sure if I have, sometimes inconsistent location of buttons. You know, it's something like you put the OK and the cancel button on the wrong side. You probably should match the industry standard and put the OK on the left and the cancel on the right, unless of course you're doing a Mac application and that's different. Sometimes it's sometimes it's that cut and dry. Sometimes, however, it's going to be something like this particular thing. Oh, nope, no, there's a similar graphic to that one. Sometimes though, it's there's not here we go. There's not a cut and dry thing. I can't tell you this is how to redesign it just on a whim. Sometimes the best I can do for a recommendation is an action plan. I can tell you to review the overall navigation. I can tell you, hey, your information architecture is poor. Do a card sorting exercise. And so sometimes your recommendation isn't going to be a design change. Sometimes your recommendation is going to be, you need a design change, and here's a potential action plan on how to approach that design change. And that's perfectly okay. The point is you're giving them a recommendation of where to start. One of the worst things you can do in these kind of situations is give them nothing. Tell them, you don't want to say, hey, you got something wrong, and leave it there. Give them at least the tools to figure out where to start, where to go next. So then just moving forward, once again, here's those guidelines, heuristic references. These are the same references that were in the Excel document, but basically, like I said, there's a few different lists of heuristic evaluations, heuristics that we're working with. There's the Nielsen's references. These are some of the classic ones, like I said, that came out in '92. These are the cognitive engineering principles. The particular company I'm working for here is very much has a very human factors bent to all of this, which I actually have to admit I do as well. So very much looking at it from a cognitive engineering, cognitive psychology perspective, and that's good. And we're very upfront about it, and so putting that out there. And then the reference task. I was just talking about it. If it's a task-based or a HE or an exploratory HE, this was kind of a combination of both. One of the things we were looking at was the fact that for EHRs, meaningful use certification is kind of a live or die sort of thing. And so one of the things that we wanted to take a look at was those particular tasks in addition to just the general product look and feel. And so we listed those tasks so people knew what we were looking at. And so once again, reference, we put it out there. And then thank you and contact information, which of course we pulled for the example. So just wanted to go over that with you because I know there were some questions about what the heuristic evaluation needed to be for the project. Do I expect you to have 92 different slides for your heuristic evaluation? No. I expect you to go through and look and come up to maybe 4 or 5, maybe up to 10 things that you potentially have found wrong that you would potentially redesign in your application. Getting back to the heuristics themselves, I actually covered this slide already. Oops. Heuristic evaluation versus user testing. Number of problems found is by HE is generally greater, although they find less severe problems. Maybe it's problems uncovered by user testing. Interaction task completion, like I said, with user testing. Users will not point out, but will subconsciously bother users, or are the types of problems that users don't necessarily notice in the usability test, but will kind of rub at them for a while. So, like I said, they both have their place. So. Next, though, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the heuristics themselves. So, like I said, there's a couple of different sets of heuristics that you'll hear. I'm going to go over a couple of different lists. I don't care, honestly, which ones you pick because you'll notice they're quite similar. But find a set that you're comfortable with and start to learn them and internalize them. And be able to speak to them. These should really just rattle off your tongue. So Schneiderman's be consistent, and not like you haven't heard me say that all semester. Enable frequent users to use shortcuts. All of these should probably sound very familiar by this time. Offer informative feedback. Design interactions that yield closure. That means top to bottom, right to left, or sorry, left to right. Provide error prevention and error handling, prevent easy reversal of action, support internal locus of control. That means the user feels in control and knows what's going on at all times. Minimize short-term memory load, recognition versus recall. Nielsen-Malek's heuristics, these are some of the originals. Visibility of system status. What would you say? Feedback. Match the system in the real world, user control and freedom, consistency, error prevention, recognition versus recall, flexibility, aesthetic and minimalistic design, recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors, help and documentation. Let's talk more. All right, be consistent. I think it goes without saying. I think I've beaten this horse till it's bloody at this point. But don't change a design on a different page of a site or in different parts of an application or even in a suite of applications. Don't change your fonts. Don't change your page layouts, your action sequence, your terminology, that sort of thing. Consistent design will aid learnability, guessability, and user comfort. Inconsistent navigation schemes will confuse users. Now, what about things like you change colors to determine what part of the site you're in? It sounds like a good idea. Believe it or not, it really confuses the heck out of users in a lot of cases. Test it. Make sure it actually makes sense to the users the way you think it does. I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong, but a lot of times it doesn't make sense to the users the way you think it does. Nielsen's equivalent, of course, is consistency and standards. So think about the ways graphic design is creating consistent visual hierarchy. Typography and illustration is designed to lead the eye through the page. You want to direct the eye left to right, top to bottom. In Western languages, the top of the page is the most dominant, not dominate, but the most important, or the first item there. You don't, on the other hand, you want to avoid graphic illustrations. You don't want to use so many bullet points, italics, bold, other visual markers that it leads to a loss of emphasis and people don't know where to look. And this leads back to that aesthetic and minimalist design. The true art of design is not your ability to add things, but to take things away until you have just the right amount of things and no more, no less. So, you want to be consistent both within the interface and across similar interfaces. Don't think about just the stuff that your application, but think about the context in which your application lives. This is why web page navigation, especially in the beginning, was so hard because everybody was so concerned about their own web page. And there were no standards. Nobody had established any web standards. Now, web standards were kind of established by consensus, but in the early days, there was no consensus. The other thing about the red lights, green lights, you think about it, the people who run the most red lights in civilian life are emergency first responders because they're the people who have the least amount of instinctive training that red lights mean stop because in their life, they're allowed to run them every once in a while. So when they're at a red light, they actually have to stop and think if they're allowed to run it or not. So, things to think about. So now I realize this slide dates me. This slide really dates me. But this was my desktop back in the early 2000s. I had all four of these instant messaging clients up because one was used by our little small software group, another was used by a different software group, one was the corporate solution, and one was everything else that I used for personal. Well, the problem was if I wanted to put one in the system tray, I had to click this button. But if I clicked this button, it would close out completely. But if I wanted to put this one in the system tray, I had to click this one, because if I click this one, it would go into the taskbar. But I wanted it to go to the system tray. And so there were many times that my boss in Florida would call me and say, "Why aren't you on same time?" And I'm like, "But I am on same time." Well, no, the problem was because I wanted to go into the system tray. And so I clicked the button that should have made it go into the system tray. But no, that's the wrong button, because on this one, it's the button to make it go in the system tray, but over here, it's the very same button is the button that closes it out completely. And so it's stuff like this, and we won't get into the fact that on one of these, you right click to send a message, on another one, you right click to do something else. And anyway, um, it was the inconsistency in these applications that all said they did the same thing, that I was constantly having to open, close, reopen, close, and making mistakes because they didn't do the same thing the same way. Next, enable frequent users to use shortcuts. This is the easiest way to make your application both novice and expert friendly. Add keyboard shortcuts. It's really that simple. You want to provide advanced and shortcut ways for frequent and advanced users to work most efficiently. These are called accelerators. These are things like search engines. These are indexes. These are sitemaps. These are history lists. These are accelerator keys. This falls under Nielsen's heuristic of flexibility and efficiency of use. Really, like I said, keyboard. All you got to say. You want to make your advanced users happy? Give them keyboard access. I mean, there's other ways to do it, but that's one of the easiest and most overlooked ways to make your expert users happy. Offer informative feedback. For every user, there should be system feedback. You want to keep the user informed of their position in the sequence of events and the status of the system. And I mean, it's things as simple as the hourglass in the status bar, the old Internet Explorer E that used to rotate, stuff like that. Um, and make sure you use the appropriate one. Don't give somebody a progress bar if the progress bar is just going to keep moving back and forth and not actually show progress. In that case, you want like a spinner or something. If you're going to show a progress, make sure make sure the progress bar shows, actual progress, that's, meaningful. So, but offer feedback. You also want to think about use the psychological concept of affordance. Buttons that look like they should be pressed, knobs that look like they should be turned, doors look like they should be open. So interface objects should visibly represent the changes. Um, Interface objects that visibly represent changes are highly effective indicators. So rollover buttons, grayed out options, that sort of thing. And so Nielsen's equivalent is a match between system status in the real world and visibility of system status. So form control affordances are something as simple as, you guys may remember checkboxes. So if you were to see a form that says, what type of calendar do you normally use? And you see the message, please check only one. And then you've got all these checkboxes. Well, the checkboxes tell me I should be able to choose multiple ones, but then I have I have this message telling me to please check only one. Well, why didn't you just do this in the first place? This clearly tells me I can only pick one, and I've just saved my developer a whole bunch of time doing validation. Um, so things to think about. Other affordances, form control affordances, this is okay, this is fine. But if I were to cover up, all of this stuff, I'd have no idea what I'm entering. I mean, granted, this doesn't look as nice and pretty and even, but now if I were to cover up this left-hand side, I could probably fill out this form even without the stuff on the left, because the form controls actually kind of tell me what it is I'm supposed to be filling in. So things to think about. Anyway, design controls that yield design interactions, that yield closure. You want to provide informative feedback as the user moves through a series of action steps, particularly at the successful conclusion of an intended act. This is also a way of providing feedback in a way as well. Provide error prevention and error handling. Even better than good error message is a careful design that prevents a problem from occurring in the first place. You want to eliminate error-prone conditions and check for them and present error users with confirmation before they commit the action. So error prevention is better than error handling, but error prevention, I caution you against error prevention in the form of dialog boxes, because error prevention in the form of dialog boxes just incurs alert fatigue and people will start to ignore them. I mean, actually create a workflow that prevents them from making an error. Um, so that being said, when you do have to present a dialog box, only do it before a destructive action. Use because then if you only present dialog boxes when there's a destructive action, people are people are bound are more inclined to pay attention to them because they're actually meaningful. Use interface tools like I just showed you with the radio buttons versus the check boxes to prevent users from making a mistake. If you can only select one, then use a radio button. I'm guaranteed I'm only going to select one if that's the only thing I can do. Use JavaScript, or actually JavaScript's out of vogue now. Validate the data before it sends to the server. Um, the the other part that comes across, that comes with this is, wherever possible, allow users to undo. Don't make things destructive that don't have to be. I understand that there's a point at which you really do have to delete their account from the server. You can't keep allowing them levels of undo, but until you hit that point where you just can't let them undo it again, computers have space. Computers have bandwidth. They have hard drive space. You know, allow for those levels of undo. Um, Now, the other thing I would point out is make sure your error messages make sense as well. Click OK to cancel it or cancel to continue. Now, I understand that when this error message came out, it was a limitation of JavaScript and the fact that you only had the OK and cancel buttons available. You couldn't rename them, but it ended up with stuff like this, and um, maybe the workflow could have been a little bit better. Or you'd end up with something like this. An error occurred when attempting to print the collection letter. What happens if I click no? Anyway, it's when you're providing error handling and prevention, you want explicit indication that something has gone wrong, but you want it in human readable language. You don't want explicit codes. You don't want syntax error with some long error code. You want polite phrasing that doesn't blame the users. You don't want something like an illegal command. You want constructive advice on how to fix the problem. You don't want to say something's just out of stock. You want to say when it'll be available, or you want to say, you know, uh, online shopping sites have this down these days. You basically, that whole, click here to be added to the waiting list to be notified when it's back in stock. That's the key to an error message. It's one click, you've been added to a list, and it'll let you know when it's back in stock. That's the way to handle an error message. So, make it as easy as possible. All right, permit easy reversal of actions. I've actually covered this to a certain degree. Make provisions for and give the users ample instructions for undoing or retreating. Knowing that actions are reversible relieves anxiety and encourages exploration. Um, this isn't as a big deal anymore because people don't do it anymore, but disabling a back button, that was the fastest way to get somebody to stop, to abandon an e-commerce site, because if they didn't think that they could go backwards, they wouldn't do it. They would just say, no, I don't trust this. I don't want to do it. So you want to allow undo and cancel wherever possible. Let the user know what to expect, though, when these actions happen. And then you want to warn the user when they're about to undertake a destructive action. Support user control. You want to give the user the tools and the shortcuts they need to be in charge. You want to let them customize it to make it useful for them. You also want to know, users are going to choose system functions by mistake, and they're going to need a clearly marked emergency exit to let them leave an unwanted state with having to go through extended dialogue. So you want to support undo, redo, and get me the heck out of here. So things to think about. Minimize short-term memory load. Minimize the user's memory load by making objects, actions, and options visible. The user should not have to remember what they did on the screen before, especially if it's a multi-screen kind of step. Remind them what they did on the previous screen. Your order so far is. Don't have them try to remember, did I pick 2-day shipping on the screen before? Tell them, yes, you chose 2-day shipping on the screen before. Instructions for using the system should appear at the top of every screen. They shouldn't have to remember what they, you provide the instructions, and then you say go, and they can't retrieve the instructions again. Nielsen says this very elegantly with recognition versus recall. Finally, help and documentation. Even though it's better if the system can be used without documentation, especially in complex systems, it may be necessary to provide it. Any such information should be easy to search, focus on the user's task, list concrete steps to be carried out, and not be too large. Now, those are the heuristics that are considered the quote unquote classics, but really the same technique of heuristic evaluation, of comparing ideas, comparing the interface to a list of things, really can be done with a number of different things. It could be that you're doing a comparison versus the list of heuristics. You could just as easily be doing a comparison versus a style guide. You could be doing a side-by-side comparison, a competitive analysis of, maybe you're doing a baseline set of heuristics, and you decide to do a competitive analysis against a competitor's product where you've chosen the top 5 heuristics you think are most important, and you decide to see where your competitor is doing versus where you're doing. Or maybe you pick a way of doing it. Maybe you're doing a standards analysis. Maybe you're doing it versus brand standards. Maybe you're doing it versus, ISO standards. Maybe, there's a number of different ways to do it. But the whole point of this evaluation technique is that that the team, both the team that's doing the evaluation and the team that is determining the evaluation needs to be done, they need to agree on the standard for comparison. So, yes, we're doing a brand evaluation, or we're doing a regulations evaluation, or we're doing heuristic, human factors evaluation. Um, you know, they agree on a standards for comparison, and then you do the evaluation technique the same way. Excel document, PowerPoint slides, and looking for suggestions, looking for recommendations, looking for places for improvement. With that, we'll close with this section and move on to cognitive walkthrough in the next section.